I heard the insult before I felt the heat rising in my face. "Excuse me, are you the help?" The CEO's wife, Madeline Pierce, queen of polished diamonds and colder than ice stares, looked me up and down like I was lint stuck to her designer gown. Behind her, a cluster of executives smothered laughs behind champagne flutes. And my 14-year-old daughter, Zoe, she stood next to me, frozen, eyes widening like she'd just seen her mother slapped in public. The chandeliers above us glittered across the ballroom of the Atlanta Regency Hotel, painting gold reflections on the marble floor. Music hummed somewhere in the background, but all I heard was the thud of humiliation. Madeline flicked her manicured fingers toward the side doors. "The servers should use the side entrance. You're blocking the photo line." Her voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through me like a whisper meant to wound. A private humiliation delivered in a very public space. What none of them knew, what not even her husband, the CEO himself, fully understood, was that I wasn't the help. I wasn't a server. I wasn't a nobody. My name is Sara Dawson. And I am the founding partner who owns 62% of Pierce & Cole Technologies, the company whose name shone in bright silver letters across the Gala stage. The CEO, her husband, Daniel, worked for me. But tonight, they treated me like I didn't even belong in the room. I swallowed my anger, placed a hand on Zoe's shoulder, and breathed slowly. They had no idea who they were speaking to. But they were about to learn. And if anyone watching this has ever been underestimated, drop a like so this story reaches someone who needs it. I didn't correct her. Not yet. The air around us shifted. People turned. Some pretending not to watch, others blatantly staring to see how I would react. I could practically feel their assumptions crawling across my skin. A woman with a tight bun whispered behind her hand. "Who let her in?" A man in a navy suit snorted. "Probably wandered in with the catering team." Their words weren't meant for me, but they wanted me to hear them. That's the thing about elitist rooms, they wound you with whispers, not weapons. But the only voice I cared about at that moment was my daughter's. "Mom," Zoe whispered, tugging on my sleeve. "We can go if you want." I looked at her, this kid who had seen me work day and night building a company from nothing but a garage in Columbus, Ohio, 20 years ago. A kid who'd watched me put on makeup in the car, sprint into boardrooms, pitch to investors twice my age. A kid who thought tonight would be the first time she saw her mother treated with the respect she'd earned. But here we were, and she had just watched strangers reduce me to the help. I forced a smile. "No, honey. We're staying." Because part of me needed to see this through. And another part of me, the quiet part that had been overlooked one too many times, wanted every single person in that room to choke on their own assumptions. But this wasn't the first time I'd been dismissed in my own company. Not by a long shot. The truth is, Pierce & Cole Technologies wasn't always this glossy. It wasn't always a top-tier software firm with contracts across half the country. When I started it, the only office I had was the back room of my sister's duplex. And the only team I had was myself, a cheap laptop, and hope I kept trying not to lose. I built custom logistics systems for small trucking companies in the Midwest, nothing glamorous, nothing beautiful, but reliable. And reliability built reputation. Reputation built contracts. Contracts built growth. By year 3, I needed help. That's when I met Daniel Pierce, fresh MBA, good mind, good manners, and one thing I desperately needed, people skills. Investors listened to him. Clients liked him. He complimented the parts of me that were tired and stretched thin. He never mistreated me. Not once. But he also never asked many questions about ownership or equity structuring. He assumed things, like most people do when they see a quiet woman working herself to the bone. The day he became CEO, he and I shook hands in a small rented conference room in Atlanta. "You built something incredible, Sara," he told me. "I'm glad to help you take it further." And he did. I never deny that. But somewhere along the way, the board decided he was the face. He was the story. He was the genius. And I became the silent partner. Not because I lacked power, but because I didn't crave the spotlight. But tonight, after what his wife had said to me in front of my daughter, I regretted every moment I ever let myself fade into the background. Before I move on, if this kind of backstory hits home for you, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how many people understand the grind. Little did I know, the worst part of the night hadn't even happened yet. Madeline wasn't done with me. She saw I hadn't moved, and her face tightened with annoyance, like I was an object refusing to return to its shelf. "I said the servers should use the side entrance," she repeated, louder this time. "This area is for guests." I stared at her calm, collected. "I am a guest." She blinked, genuinely confused. "Of who?" The question stunned me. Not because she asked, but because of how she asked. Like the idea of someone like me being invited was absurd. Behind her, the executives stirred, pretending to check their phones, avoiding eye contact. They didn't want to intervene, not in a way that might cost them favor with the CEO's wife. Madeline scoffed. "Well, whoever you belong to should train you better." Her words were a match. And my dignity was gasoline. Zoe's little gasp beside me nearly broke me. I opened my mouth, ready to finally say something, when a familiar voice cut through the humiliation. "Sara?" Daniel appeared behind her, adjusting his tux jacket, smiling warmly like this was the beginning of a pleasant conversation. He didn't sense the tension. He didn't see Zoe's red cheeks or my clenched jaw. Madeline spun toward him. "Danny, can you please tell the staff to use the side?" "She's not staff," he interrupted gently. She's Sara. You know, that's Sara." A flicker of panic crossed Madeline's face. She glanced at me again, this time with interest. "Wait, the Sara who does our back-end something? The tech person?" I didn't answer. Daniel gave a small, clueless laugh. "She's more important than that." More important than that. That was it. That was the closest he had ever come to acknowledging what I actually was. And even then, it wasn't enough. I realized with painful clarity. The CEO himself didn't understand the authority he reported to. And everyone else in the room? They took their cues from him. Tonight, that would change. The humiliation should have ended there. But life has a way of testing your breaking point. Later that evening, the crowd gathered for the annual remarks. Daniel stepped on stage, charming and polished, thanking teams and investors. He spoke about growth, innovation, the visionaries who built this place. And then he said it. None of this would exist without my wife, Madeline, who has supported me every step of the way. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. But there was no mention of me. Not my name. Not my work. Not the 20 years I bled for this company. Madeline preened, placing a hand on her heart, eyes scanning the room for admiration. When her gaze met mine, it lingered just long enough to twist the knife. In that moment, I felt something inside me drop into place. A decision. A quiet one. A powerful one. You will not erase me again. If you've ever been erased from your own story, comment below. I want to hear your voice because mine was silent for too long. After the speech, Daniel approached me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sorry I couldn't highlight you, he said quietly. The PR team thinks it's better if the public sees a single leadership figure. Cleaner image, you know? Cleaner. Neater. Easier. That's funny, I replied softly. Considering I own 62% of the company. He flinched, visibly. Like he'd forgotten. Or maybe, never truly processed it. Sara, come on, he whispered. It's not like that. You have all the control you need behind the scenes. Behind the scenes. Where the help stays. Something cold settled in my bones. This wasn't just Madeline's disrespect. This was a culture Daniel allowed. A blindness he never bothered to correct. He clapped my shoulder like I was a loyal employee. I'll call you Monday. We'll talk through next quarter. I stepped away. No, I said quietly. We won't. He froze. And that's when he realized something was wrong. But it was already too late for him. I drove home that night with Zoe asleep in the passenger seat, her head leaning against the window, her curls catching the glow of highway lights. My humiliation had simmered into resolve. I wasn't angry at Daniel for being the face of the company. He was good at it. But I was angry that he let an entire culture form around the belief that I wasn't worth acknowledgement. And I was furious that his wife felt entitled to shame me in front of my child. When I carried Zoe into the house and tucked her into bed, she woke long enough to mumble. Mom, you didn't do anything wrong. Her words cracked something open inside me. This company had taken my time, my brilliance, my patience. But I would not let it take my daughter's pride. I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter and pulled up the corporate bylaws, every line I had personally written 20 years earlier. And there it was. The power no one seemed to remember I had. I whispered it aloud, a vow to myself. I don't need the spotlight. But I will not be disrespected again. If you're still with me and you've ever had this kind of turning point, where you finally decided enough was enough, tap like so this story reaches someone who needs to hear it. It was time to put my ownership to use. I didn't storm into offices. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't send angry emails. I used pen, paper, procedure. First, I scheduled an emergency meeting for the following Friday, mandatory attendance for all executives and major shareholders. They assumed it was about budget forecasting. They had no idea why the invitation came with my digital signature instead of Daniel's. Second, I pulled payroll logs, expense reports, and performance summaries. Not to destroy Daniel, he wasn't corrupt, but to show how much the company relied on people who had been ignored or undervalued because they weren't in the spotlight. Third, I drafted a leadership restructuring proposal. Not to fire Daniel, but to reposition him. To teach him. To protect myself. To prevent a culture like this from taking root again. And lastly, I printed the Gala photos and witness statements HR collected when I submitted my incident report about Madeline. HR didn't want to take it. But legally, they had to. I wasn't going to humiliate her. I was going to educate her. With consequences. Friday arrived. The boardroom felt colder than usual, sterile white walls, framed awards, a long mahogany table filled with people shifting nervously in leather chairs. Daniel entered last. Confused. Concerned. Still not understanding. Sara, he whispered. Why did you call a meeting without? I held up a hand. Please take your seat. He obeyed. Madeline wasn't there, of course. This wasn't her domain. But she was why we were here. I began calmly. Last Saturday night, I attended the Pierce & Cole annual gala with my daughter. What happened there exposed a cultural flaw that endangers the integrity of this company. Chairs shifted. Eyes darted. Daniel swallowed hard. I clicked a remote and the screen behind me lit up with a still image from the gala's camera crew. Madeline's face twisted in disdain. Me standing silently. Zoe's small form behind me. Gasps filled the room. I read the transcript of her exact words. Daniel's face went pale. I didn't know, he whispered. That's the problem, I replied. I showed the HR report. The witness statements. The video clips. Then I delivered the real blow, not cruel, just true. I built this company. I own 62% of it. But last weekend, your leadership culture allowed the founders to be treated like outsiders. Like the help. Silence swallowed the room. And then I unveiled the proposal. The proposal wasn't vindictive. It was surgical. Daniel would remain CEO, but his public role would be shared with me. I would become Chief Vision Officer, a position requiring public acknowledgement of my contributions. Mandatory leadership training for all executives, including consequences for discriminatory behavior from spouses at corporate events. Revocation of event privileges for any non-employee who violated professional conduct, including Madeline. A restructuring of reporting lines to reflect actual ownership and authority. The room went still. Daniel finally spoke. His voice was shaky but genuine. Sara. I am so sorry. I didn't realize how far things had gone. I should have defended you. I should have known. I nodded once. This isn't about your apology. It's about ensuring this never happens again. He lowered his head. What happens to Madeline? Nothing public, I said. But she is no longer permitted at corporate events. And she will write an apology, to me, and to Zoe. He closed his eyes. A mixture of shame and relief washed over him. And then, softly, he said, "Thank you for giving me a chance to fix this." The vote was unanimous. The proposal passed. If you're still watching, to everyone who has ever been dismissed or underestimated, subscribe for more stories like this one, because I promise, you are not alone. 3 days later, I received a handwritten letter. From Madeline. The handwriting was shaky, the tone stiff, but it was real. She apologized for her assumptions. For her words. For humiliating me in front of my child. She ended with, "I did not know who you were." I didn't smile. Didn't feel triumph. Because the point was never to show her who I was. It was to make sure no one ever treated another woman the way she treated me. I framed Zoe's copy of the letter in her room. Not out of vanity, but as a reminder to her. Respect is not earned by status. It is given freely or not at all. At the next corporate event, months later, I walked into the ballroom again. Chandeliers glowing. Music playing. People chatting in clusters. But this time, something was different. People saw me. They nodded. They acknowledged me. Not because I demanded attention, but because I took back my place. Daniel approached with genuine warmth. I'm glad you're here, Sara. Me too, I said. Zoe squeezed my hand. I liked this version better. So did I. Because quiet strength is still strength. And when you finally decide to stand in your own light, no one can dim it again. Here's my truth. People will treat you the way you let them treat you. Not because they're evil, sometimes they're just blind to the power you carry. But when the moment comes to defend your worth, do it with dignity. Do it with clarity. Do it without destroying yourself in the process. And remember, power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. But when you finally speak it aloud, the whole room will hear you. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment and tell me your biggest takeaway, and tap like so it reaches the next person who needs it.